The Galactic Empire, the superpower that reigned with an iron fist for 23 years. But how long would the Empire have actually lasted? I mean, was the Empire doomed to fall?
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Again, we're going to start with a bit of history. As we know, in 19 BBY, the Galactic Republic was turned into the Galactic Empire, which resulted in the destruction of the Jedi Order and end of the Clone Wars. Palpatine, who by many was hailed as the hero of the Republic for ending the war, was now the sole ruler of the galaxy. He had control over the entire armed forces, including millions of clones and hundreds of thousands of ships. Despite Palpatine effectively having all the power, the Senate still held significant influence. Palpatine needed to undermine this to avoid them planning any coups against him. This involved removing any old opposition, either by having them arrested or just blatantly assassinated. He focused on bolstering his military, upgrading their equipment and striving to make the Imperial war machine unrivaled. 19 years later and the first Death Star is destroyed, 4 years after this the Emperor is killed, and within a year the Imperial remnants were forced to sue for peace with the New Republic. But even if the Rebel Alliance was never able to defeat the Empire, how long would it have lasted? Firstly, I want to talk about how the Empire actually works. It's an autocracy that is very military centralised. This means that the Empire spends huge amounts on expanding its military and making particularly deadly superweapons. Now, as a perfect example, the Death Star, a weapon that could destroy planets. It seems like overkill, doesn't it? But you haven't heard the worst of it. According to some very smart people at the University of Lehigh in Pennsylvania, it's estimated that to build a Death Star it would cost approximately 8.1 quadrillion US dollars. That's about 13,000 times the amount of money on Earth. Now, this amount can be debated for obvious reasons, but it really puts the scale of the Empire's military into perspective. And of course that's before you take into consideration the rest of the Imperial fleet, for example 26,000 Star Destroyers that the Empire had at the height of its power, not to mention the army and every other little dark secret the Empire was hiding. Again, like the Clone Army, the real problem of the Empire lies in the economy. Empires typically expand, either peacefully or in this case through conquering. Now, in the early stages of the Empire, they still have plenty of systems and planets to conquer, large amounts of which were once separatist loyalist worlds. When the Empire conquered a new world, its economy would see a sort of boom. It would instantly have access to the entire planet's wealth, whatever it may be. Some planets could be rich in ore and minerals, others may be home to separatist industrialists and hold huge factories. For others, such as Kashyyyk, possibly the most valuable resource was the Wookiees, which the Empire used as a slave labour force for their huge industrial projects. The main thing to remember here is that militant governments need to expand in order to prosper. However, eventually the Empire was bound to run out of territory to conquer. The wealth that it had plundered from conquering the galaxy would eventually dry up. Now, it was these injections of wealth that made the Imperial military viable, meaning it would pay for itself. However, without it, the military would begin to hemorrhage credit and become a burden on the Empire's economy. Granted, the Empire could look outside their galaxy into the unknown regions, but this is incredibly risky, and the Empire can't exactly just take what they want and leave. The worlds that the Empire conquered and stripped of wealth would still need to be occupied, using up thousands of troops and valuable equipment. Now, traditionally, military centralised governments such as the Empire will only keep its military as long as necessary. After it's conquered its new lands and bought order, it will begin to decrease its military presence. Colonised worlds will be put under the control of Imperial loyalists, and the citizens will have every aspect of their life controlled, but should be able to continue and live their life in relative peace. However, there's a few problems with this. Firstly, the Empire never really decreased its military. It stayed and even grew. Now, the knock-on effect of this is that the Empire now has to fund it. And where are they going to get these funds from? Well, all the people. The Empire taxed its citizens extortionate amounts in order to preserve and expand its military presence. Remember that 8.1 quadrillion? Well, it was funded by the Imperial taxpayer. Needless to say, for this reason, there's a huge amount of animosity between the Empire and its own people, who were essentially paying for their own oppression.
See what the Empire has done to your lives, your families, and your freedom? It's only gonna get worse. Unless we stand up and fight back.
Now, with a society that resents their government, it would only be a matter of time before people would eventually rise up against the oppression. For this reason, the Empire would respond in the only way they knew how, with force, using their giant military to obliterate any signs of disloyalty, which only widened the rift between the Empire and its people. Another key problem the Empire would face would be corruption. Okay, so when you see the Empire, first thing you probably think is how unified it is, but sadly that's rarely the case. Such a huge empire with so many subjects means Imperial commanders, particularly Moffs, have relatively free reign over their actions. For this reason, they could be as corrupt as they wanted, with very little intrusion from the rest of the Empire. This results in power plays amongst Imperial commanders. It would be relatively common to have competitors assassinated or framed in order to levy your own position. Granted, if they were caught, there would be repercussions, but with Imperial intelligence focusing on external threats and with so many commanders under the Empire's employ, they would realistically never be caught. Now, the final and possibly largest issue with the Empire and its sustainability is the problem that many empires face, and that is the line of succession. So, Palpatine was the unquestioned leader of the Empire, and very few would ever dare plan a coup against him. However, Palpatine can't live forever. Eventually he would die, and leave an unfillable void. Now, of course, someone would have to become the new Emperor. In my personal opinion, the best candidate would be Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin. He really was the Empire's golden boy. He handled the logistical nightmare which was the Death Star's construction, and brought Imperial rule to countless worlds. Tarkin really was the best leader the Empire could hope for. Hell, he may have even done a better job than the Emperor. But there's a problem. Tarkin was 64 when he died on board the Death Star, and even if this didn't happen, it's unclear if he would outlive the Emperor. Many would speculate that Vader would take over as Emperor. I mean, he was his apprentice, but this ultimately would be a terrible outcome. Vader was not a natural leader, he was a warrior, a tool Palpatine used to win his wars. Vader didn't care for fancy politics or striving in military technology, or the thousands of star systems under his control. For this reason, even more power would be delegated to the Moffs, who would likely cause more damage than good through their power plays. This is actually exactly what happened after the Emperor's death. The command structure of the Empire turned on itself, which resulted in them losing so much ground to the New Republic. And this is only if Vader's transition to power was even allowed to happen. Individuals such as Palpatine and Tarkin had proved themselves time and time again as capable leaders and formidable foes. However, many Moffs saw Vader as little more than just a weapon. So, do you think that Imperial Command would support Vader, or do you believe that they would plan to overthrow him? After all, he's only one man and they have control over the military. A brilliant real-life example of this is Roman emperors. Approximately 35 were assassinated, many of which by their own Praetorian Guard, who were paid off by competitors. For this reason, I highly doubt that Vader would be able to successfully run the Empire without either being assassinated or plunging it into civil war. So ultimately, I believe that if the Empire wasn't torn apart by its frivolous spending on its military or rebel insurgencies, then eventually, by the time the Emperor did die, the Empire would be ripped apart by petty power plays and bids for the role as Emperor, which would likely result in the Republic being reformed. But what do you think? Do you believe that the Empire was doomed to eventually fall, or do you believe that it could have been sustained? Please put your opinions down below because I'm fascinated to know, and I have to admit I'm kind of torn on the idea. Thanks for watching, please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.